All right, y'all, we're going to wrap up chapter 2, and I'm going to try my best to make this make sense. They always say if you can explain something, that means you really understand it. And so I'm going to try my best to synthesize what I have learned. So when the black slaves came to the colonies, what happened was that there were white servants there. The white servants were basically indentured servants. They had a time that they had to work, and then after that they were free. Obviously, unlike the black slaves who that was not the case. And also for the Native Americans who were forced to work, right? So what happened is that the white servants were still treated like shit. Just because they were going to eventually be free doesn't mean that while they were working, they were treated well. And so the black slaves and the white servants worked together. They were the ones, tending to the crops and building things. And so Negro and white servants of the 17th century were remarkably unconcerned about the visible physical differences. Black and white worked together, fraternized together. The very fact that laws had to be passed after a while to forbid such relations indicates the strength of this tendency. So basically what ended up happening is that the British colonizers that were creating the laws and who were establishing Jamestown and the colonies or whatever realized that they had a massive problem on their hands, because if the black people, if the black slaves, the white servants, and the Native Americans band together to revolt, they would win. They would win. So the thing here too is that there was no concept of racism. When the black slaves were brought over and they were working alongside white servants, the concept as we know racism right now was not a thing. It was really about the fact that they were all treated like shit and they all wanted to be free. But these horrible people who were constructing this new society realized that they had to do something about that. So what did they do? As a matter of fact, let me just tell you about one rebellion that took place so that you can have proof that they were revolting. The first large-scale revolt in the North American colonies took place in New York in 1712. In New York, slaves were 10% of the population, the highest proportion in the northern states, where economic conditions usually did not require large numbers of field slaves. About 25 blacks and 2 Indians set fire to a building, then killed 9 whites who came on the scene. They were captured by soldiers, put on trial, and 21 were executed. In this particular case, it was Native Americans and black slaves that came together. But here we also have, from time to time, whites were involved in the slave resistance. As early as 1663, indentured white servants and black slaves in Gloucester County, Virginia, formed a conspiracy to rebel and gain their freedom. The plot was betrayed and ended with executions. Sometimes slaves and free men ran off together or cooperated in crimes together. Sometimes black male slaves ran off and joined white women. From time to time, white ship captains and watermen dealt with runaways, perhaps making the slave a part of the crew. Only one fear was greater than the fear of black rebellion in the new American colonies, and that was the fear that discontented whites would join black slaves to overthrow the existing order. In the early years of slavery, especially before racism as a way of thinking was firmly ingrained, while white indentured servants were often treated as badly as black slaves, there was a possibility of cooperation. As Edmund Morgan sees it, there are hints that 2 despised groups initially saw each other as sharing the same predicament. It was common, for example, for servants and slaves to run away together, steal hogs together, get drunk together. It was not uncommon for them to make love together. In Bacon's rebellion, one of the last groups to surrender was a mixed band of 80 Negroes and 20 English servants. So, the elite class put measures in place to prevent their worst fear from coming true. Virginia's ruling class, having proclaimed that all white men were superior to black, went on to offer their social but white inferiors a number of benefits previously denied them. In 1705, a law was passed requiring masters to provide white servants whose indentured time was up with 10 bushels of corn, 30 shillings, and a gun, while women servants were to get 15 bushels of corn and 40 shillings. Also, the newly freed servants were to get 50 acres of land. Morgan concludes, once the small planter felt less exploited by taxation and began to prosper a little, a little, he became less turbulent, less dangerous, more respectable. He could begin to see his big neighbor not as an extortionist, but as a powerful protector of their common interests. We see now a complex web of historical threads to ensnare blacks for slavery in America. The desperation of starving settlers, the special helplessness of the displaced African, the powerful incentive of profit for slave trader and planter, the temptation of superior status for poor whites, the elaborate controls against escape and rebellion, the legal and social punishment of black and white collaboration. This is about class fear. This is about class fear. And I can't help but just think about how this is playing out right now in America. You have people who really are under the foot of capitalism and oppression, fighting against each other, primarily white people fighting against other people because they still believe that they are superior, even though they are in the same shit predicament as the majority of us. This was by design. This was by design. This was on purpose. This was the only way for the United States as we now know it to establish itself. Because if everybody realized that they were actually on the same team and that they were to come together and fight against those people, then it wouldn't have worked. That is a massive takeaway. And that is what truly created the separation that we now see today, where black people have just time after time after time after time been stripped of rights, and white people, regardless of their class status, have been manipulated and led to believe in an illusion that they are different than the poor black people of the United States. They're the same, but because of racism, they believe they're different. And that is how the early settlers and the white supremacists of today continue to have a grip on America. Yeah.